This crowd rises to its feet. Vaccaro slammed it home. Garland left wing, free ball. Perfect! Garland run of the lane, lobbed to Mobley. Pow! And Allen blocked the shot at the rim. Pow! With the left hand and a foul.
The Chase Down podcast is presented by Fubo, the official streaming partner of the Cavs. Watch over 350 channels of live sports and TV, including FanDuel Sports Network without cable. There's no cost. There's no commitment. Try for free at FuboTV.com/Cavs. The Cavaliers are 11-0, guys. 11-0. They're so good. Justin just couldn't handle it. He had to bail. He couldn't make it onto the pod. He's exhausted. He's got a fragile constitution, and by that I mean I think he's got dinner with his family or something. What a loser! Anyway, so it will be myself, Carter Shade, hosting on this particular evening, but I'm not alone, guys. I would never subject you to 2 solo pods in a month. So joining us instead is Locked On Cavs, Danny Cunningham. How you doing, Danny?
I'm great, man. Thanks for having me. How embarrassing for Justin that he has to miss this episode.
I know. Well, I was getting ready to be like, bro, if we lose the second you disappear, I will never forgive you. If you jinx us out of this. Fault. All right, before we get started, before we jump into the Cavs action, I did want to give you a little chance to shout out your platform. You've been doing an unbelievable job covering the Cavs this season. Tell folks where they can find you.
Thanks, man. Yeah, so every day been podcasting at Locked On Cavs, also writing about the team almost every day at my new Substack, The Inside Shot. Right now with the Cavs having won their first 11 games of the year, I'm running an 11% off sale for yearly subscriptions. So actually, if you think the Cavs are going to win Monday night, you might want to hold off, because if they beat Chicago and go to 12-0, that's going to go up to 12% off and so on and so forth. But it's been a great time. This is a great team to get to chronicle every day. It's a great team to be around. It's a great team to get to watch play basketball and having a lot of fun doing the job.
Yeah, well, I'm really enjoying it. I am a subscriber of the Substack and very much enjoying, and also really enjoying your Locked On Cavs coverage. I mean, something I want to shout out in particular that you've been doing that's really cool is you've been kind of doing like a roundtable at the beginning of every week, talking with a beat reporter or a podcaster for every team the Cavs are playing that week. Just kind of give like a 10-minute snapshot of what to expect. Is really nice stuff, man.
Yeah, it's been fun just trying to, because we're so, and I think, I'm guilty of this too, like so hyper focused on the Cavs. We're watching every Cavs game. There's not the opportunity to watch every game in the NBA as much as I think all of us basketball fans would want to. I just kind of think that's the best way to try and find as much knowledge in a short period of time about who the Cavs are facing that particular week. I think it's been a fun thing to put together. Yeah,
it's been great. And, the Cavs certainly haven't made it hard on us. I mean, this has been one of the most unbelievable runs. I mean, really, in a lot of ways in the history of the franchise. They get really tested last night against Brooklyn, and, coming off the heels of a gargantuan ass kicking against the Warriors. Like, what do you make of where the team kind of stands at this point in the streak? 11-0 is crazy. The schedule looking ahead is relatively manageable going into a showdown with Boston. Are they going to keep this going, brother?
So I don't see why not. Now, we can say that, and they could go out and they could lose to Chicago, because in this league, anything can happen on any night, right? Like there's those guys get paid too. And the game against Brooklyn, despite the fact that the team very clearly didn't play well, and Kenny Atkinson mentioned after the game they were not great on Saturday night. But what impressed me, and I think what has been the most impressive thing to me about this team so far, aside from the record, because going 11-0 is incredible and wildly impressive, but it's that they have won in a number of different ways, right? Like that win on Saturday night looked so much different than the win against the Warriors. And it looked so much different than the win a week and a half or 2 weeks ago against the New York Knicks, and so on and so forth. So that's what's been really impressive to me, is that this team has adapted a new style, and they have an ideal way of winning, but they have found ways to win when that's not necessarily working the way it wasn't against Brooklyn. That's been super impressive to me. And that is part of the reason why I think a lot of people should believe in this team. And I think it's the reason why a lot of people nationally are taking notice of what this team has done so far.
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, I felt like that Brooklyn game was the first game they kind of deserved to lose. The first game where I thought they played a bad game. Pretty much, second quarter on, I don't really think they played their style, even in the comeback, it's just an army of floaters and 2-point shots. I don't think they made a 3-pointer in the fourth. Maybe they made one. They got completely taken out of their style for the first time.
I think they made 1 3 in the second half. They were 6 of 9 from deep in the first quarter, and they finished like 10 of 38 or something. It was not a good shooting display. And the other thing that like really stuck out to me, the Cavs have not played like no one's confusing them with the 7 seconds or less Suns from years and years ago, but they're playing much faster than they had the last couple of years. The Nets went into yesterday's game 29th in pace, and that was the first game that they won where they played the style of the other team, if you will.
Yeah, I mean that Nets team, man, I don't know if anyone's guarded them like that. I think a lot of, it wasn't like, I feel like there are games where you see a team not show up and have the pace dictated as a result of that. I don't know if that was the case. I think the Cavs were really trying to get the game back into their kind of style, into their control. Brooklyn kind of wouldn't let them.
Yeah, and I think a big part of that was, go back and watch just random possessions in the second and third quarter when the Nets really went on that run. Like I think they went on a 30-5 run after the Cavs had a 15-point lead in the second quarter. And the most consistent thing about what the Nets were doing was Dennis Schroeder was defending 94 feet. And it wasn't just, here's token full court pressure to make you actually have to dribble the ball up the floor. No, everyone was being defended 94 feet. Like that was a game. And Kenny Atkinson described it afterwards as like, it was almost like he was back at the Olympics and the Nets were playing a style of basketball that you typically see in FIBA, where it's super physical. There's pressure for all 94 feet. I can't remember another game. And of course there are possessions where teams will do that, but I can't remember a team doing that as consistently as Brooklyn did. And I think that was the biggest reason why the Cavs had to play so much slower.
Yeah, it was, I'll tell you what, Jordi Fernandez is a good coach. I know that Cavs Twitter has flirted with that guy many times. Used to coach the Cavs G League team, used to coach the Charge, I believe, once upon a time. And like, that team is playing above their weight. And I also think that team is interesting because obviously they were supposed to be terrible. Everyone thought they were going to be like the worst team in the league, and they've been like about a 500 basketball team. And we're heading into 2 in a row against the Celtics and the Cavs. 2 games they almost won, and it's like I just think when you look at a roster like that, having 8 or 9 no doubt NBA players on your roster, it's hard to be too bad. It's just like it's hard to have that low of a floor.
Right. When you have guys that are, and you and I can't look into a crystal ball and see what the Nets are going to look like from a roster standpoint after the trade deadline. Like that could be a very different basketball team in a couple of months. And I understand that. But Jordy has them playing really hard, which I think was evident both of the last 2 nights. Go back and watch the game they played against Boston, where they went to overtime with the Celtics on Friday night. And then obviously the game against the Cavs. So when you are able to, as a coach, get your team to play as hard as the Nets very clearly are playing for Jordi Fernandez, while also having guys that don't stink. Like they don't have a bunch of bad basketball players. Not saying that 1 through 15, their roster is great, but as you mentioned, they have 8 or 9 guys that are legitimate NBA players. And at the start of the season, when you're playing hard, when you still have reasons to believe, and you do have that type of talent, you're not going to be as bad as everyone expects. It's not to say the Nets won't turn into a bad team down the road this season, but right now they're playing hard.
It feels like a classic, hey, we're going to need to make some transactions at the deadline to ensure that we are going the direction our franchise wants to go. And, we see that happen a lot. We've seen the Jazz do it like 3 years in a row. So, all kudos to Brooklyn. I think, even though I don't think the Cavs played their best game, I thought Brooklyn really made them earn that win. And again, down the stretch, Danny, it's Darius Garland. You yourself tweeted that in his 18 minutes of clutch time this year, he has 24 points on 9 of 12 shooting with 4 assists. I mean, imagine any stretch where we saw Darius play 18 minutes with 24 points on 9 of 12 shooting and 4 assists and as a plus 26. Like, we'd consider any of those stretches great. The fact that that's been the clutch every minute of clutch time that Darius has played this year. I mean, at this point, Danny, like, is he like kind of no doubt the closer that this team should be using to generate their late game offense?
I mean, I think for right now, absolutely. And part of that is I don't think Donovan has been very good in clutch time. And obviously, all of this is very
One
small
very
sample
big
size
shot
stuff.
notwithstanding.
Right, of course, that shot he hit against the Bucks is actually, I believe, the only field goal attempt he's made in clutch time so far this season. But it's 11 games. Obviously, not all of those have featured clutch time. I think he's only played in 4 or 5 clutch time games, so it's a very small sample size. But what we've seen from Garland in fourth quarters has been phenomenal. Like he looks so much different just as a basketball player than the guy who was playing point guard for the Cavs last year. And there was obviously a lot going on for him that I think was outside of his control that contributed to a season that I think he knows he can be better than if you look at last year. But this guy, this version of Darius Garland, and I already feel like I have a cold take about it, but I went into this season thinking, because of how good Donovan Mitchell is, because of how deep the Eastern Conference is, I don't know that Darius Garland can be an all-star. Not that Darius Garland's not an all-star talent, because I was somebody that was buying up land on Darius Garland as often as I could, just expecting a bounce back from him. But when you share the backcourt with a guy that is a bona fide superstar in the NBA the way that Donovan Mitchell is, I think that's really tough. But then to see what Garland has done through the first 11 games so far, he's been incredible. Like this is an all NBA version of a guard is in what we're seeing. I know his counting stats aren't necessarily what they could be, but that's because the Cavs have had so many blowouts. Like he's not even playing 30 minutes a game at this point, and he's been phenomenal.
Yeah, you look, the per game stats are very strong. He's actually just a little bit off his career high. He's averaging 20.5 points, 6.5 assists. You go, okay, 20 and 6. That's what a good, not quite all-star does. But then you look at the per 36s, and that really tells the story. I mean, he's at 25 and 8 with only 3.2 turnovers per 36, slashing 54% from the field, 48% from three, and 95% from the free throw line. Like this is peak efficiency.
Yeah, that's not bad.
He is so clearly the engine for this Cavs offense right now. I'd say even more than Mobley on the offensive end right now. Mobley has stretches where he raises the ceiling higher, but like I feel like right now Darius just has the keys, and like to your point, like I think it just makes sense for him to be the guy that's running the offense in clutch time. Obviously, that doesn't mean if Donovan Mitchell's got 40 points through 3 quarters and you're in a tight game, you're not going to give him the ball. But like the thing that's so nice about Darius is, and again, I talked about this on a pod a couple weeks ago, I feel like he was at times last year, even on games where he was playing okay, he was doing a lot of predetermining of like, I've got to switch, so I'm going to try to get a shot up. Right now, he is just all feel, and he can have scored 3 times in a row. And if they overcommit by a step, he's going to find the roller, running the pick and roll, or find someone flashing along baseline in the dunker spot. Like I feel like his ability to keep other guys involved down the stretch of these games in clutch time, those 4 assists in the 18 minutes matter almost as much as the 9 of 12 shooting. I won't say as much as, but almost as much.
Right. Right. When you're shooting 75% from the floor in clutch time, I think that might matter just a little bit more. I think the last year it looking like there were some predetermined decisions that he was making is a really good observation. And think back to last year, how many times it would feel as if he would get a mismatch, and even if he wasn't attempting a shot and he would drive, he would leave his feet and he would have a plan with the basketball, typically to pass, but that person wouldn't necessarily be open, but he was expecting them to be. Think of how, and it would ultimately lead to a turnover. Think of how much more rare that has been this year. It's not completely wiped away. It will never be completely wiped away, and that's fine. But I think that has been taken out of his game so much more, and that's part of the reason why he's averaging a career low in turnovers right now. As far as the closing stuff goes, I think the best part about this for the Cavs and how good Darius is in this situation is you can count on him to be able to do this really well because he's shown that he can. But also, there are going to be nights when he's not good in clutch time. Those nights will happen. This team is not going to go 82-0 either. I know this is all breaking news, but the Cavs have other options if he's not. And I think that is part of the beauty of this team and part of the reason why they can be so good down the stretch, because they have so many different guys on the floor that are capable of hurting opponents at any time.
Yeah, and it also just gives you the insulation in case a guy's not having their night. I mean, I thought Jarrett probably played his worst game as a Cavalier last night. In terms of he had a few nice defensive plays, a few nice hustle plays, but the offensive feel just wasn't there. He was shorting every layup. He was getting, the Brooklyn's physicality was really giving him a lot of problems. I mean, he threw a lob to George Niang.
I did not have that on my bingo card when I sat down last night.
For my entire George Niang watching career, I didn't have that on my bingo card. So there was just a lot of puzzling decisions, and the fact that you can just say, all right, Evan, you're going to need to play 5 the last 10 minutes of the game. It's not Jarrett's night. We're going to sit him. The fact that you can buy a couple minutes with Dean at the 5 and not have the game get away from you, though, I was certainly afraid that it might. I just feel like their strength in numbers is stronger than ever, both at the very top end where they can have one of their stars have an objectively bad game and still come through. And by the way, I don't think Donnie had a good game. He had that great start. He scores 15 first quarter points, goes 4 or 5 from 3, hits 3 free throws on a drawn 3-point attempt, and then pretty much does not make a significant scoring impact the rest of the way. Neither him or Jarrett have it going whatsoever. I don't know if Donnie touched the ball in the last 5 minutes of the game last night. And other stars can rise up and kind of meet the moment.
That has been one of the awesome things about this team. And I don't know that Donovan was really super involved offensively. Kenny kind of spoke about using him as a decoy down the stretch in his post-game media availability. And yeah, he made a couple free throws, he had the ball with a couple of take fouls that Brooklyn committed to ice the game, which was nice to still see him be able to do that. But it's so nice to be able to see other stars step up. When Jarrett Allen, I don't know if it was the worst game he's ever had as a Cav. It very well may be. But objectively, like you said, he was just not good on Saturday night. But Evan Mobley stepped up. And I think the fact that this also says a lot about Kenny Atkinson as a coach. And I think it says a lot about the state of this locker room, because Jarrett Allen he's an all-star center. I know he's only made one all-star team, but last year, I thought he deserved to be an Eastern Conference all-star. He was that good. I thought Agreed. He was better last year than the year he was actually named an all-star. I thought last year was the best year of his career. It's not easy to have a player of that caliber who's not having a good night, and you have to say, hey, we're going to close this game out without you. That's not an easy thing to do. But I think it speaks a lot to, one, the trust that Kenny Atkinson has earned from this locker room, and two, this locker room being one that gets along with each other, that isn't filled with a ton of huge egos. And even after the game, Kenny mentioned that Jarrett Allen was one of the happiest guys that they won that game, despite the fact that he had no impact in the fourth quarter because he didn't play. That's not always an easy situation to navigate, but I think how they navigated it says a lot about who Kenny is as a coach, and it says a lot about how this locker room feels about Kenny as a coach.
Yeah, and frankly, what a good dude Jarrett is, and this is something I've literally been arguing about this for years with people who have wanted to blow up this core, is, saying especially the too big thing is the idea that, you can't win when you're devoting this much resources to too big. So I'm like, Jarrett's on a crazy team-friendly contract and has been for years, and he is not a crazy ego guy. Where if you have a series where he and Evan only share the floor for 7 or 8 minutes a game, because it's just not that kind of series, and he only gets to play 20 to 25 minutes a game in a series, I don't think you're going to be looking at a mutiny from a guy like that. He is the ultimate team player. He just wants to win, just wants to play with his his teammates and be a good teammate. He's not an ego guy, and I think he gets a lot of credit for that, even in a game that he'd probably is not going to want to remember coming on the back end, other than, obviously the W. So I feel like he gets a lot of credit. Karras gets a lot of credit for having to muscle through playing at the 4. I got to say, though, Danny, I don't know about you. I felt like this was one of the first games where I was really like, man, it would be nice to have Max Strus. Because those uber small ball lineups feel a little differently with him at the 4.
Yeah, especially when I don't know that Isaac Okoro had the best night on Saturday night either. So I do think Max would have been really useful. And two, Dean Wade is getting over an illness. Let's not act like he's at full strength again, coming off of missing a few games because he was sick. So I think that matters too. But I definitely do think they missed Max Strus, and it's so easy, I think, to almost forget that they've been on this run while missing a starter. Like that makes it all the more impressive that they're 11-0. And we talked so much last year about how the starting five had only played 28 games together between Max with the rest of the core four.
That number
and
is still
Donovan
the
Darius.
same.
That number is 0 for this year, and they're 11-0. And I think that makes it so much more impressive.
Yeah, he's I just think that is like when I was really looking, because obviously it's so hard to analyze wins, I've always, I think the expression I've always heard is like, it's always easier when there's a body to dissect, and a loss, it's really easy to learn good lessons from and about what your roster doesn't have or needs. And like wins, it's harder to grow and learn from them. That's why you see it's hard to maintain a winning culture, because eventually you start getting high on your own supply. You start kind of, falling off and losing some of those things that made you successful in the first place, or you can't adapt as well from a winning situation. So like it is hard to find those little threads, but like that is the one thing I saw was like, okay, especially on nights where a team like the Nets are playing such tight ball pressure and you need kind of playmaking and speed on the perimeter, because it's not like, I don't think Dean had a bad game, but it did not feel like Dean's matchup, and like they needed 3 or 4 guys who could run a pick and roll, even as a secondary guy, or have the ball swing around the perimeter and attack the rim and like reliably be able to get a bucket. That's why Ty Jerome's out there. That's why Karras is out there. And like having a guy with Max kind of gives you all the things that you kind of need in the small ball 4. Like Justin always says, like the year that Miami beat Boston in the playoffs and made the finals, Max would played like 40 or 50% of his minutes at power forward. Like this is a guy who gives you that kind of flexibility. And I hadn't really felt his absence in terms of providing that lineup flexibility, just because this team has been doing so well. And frankly, they just haven't been under duress enough for us to notice.
Right, yes.
But yeah, it does. Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, you bring up it's almost easier to learn in losses instead of wins. I think last night is kind of the perfect win to learn off of, where it's a win that doesn't feel the same as the other wins. I was sitting there at Friday night when the Cavs are up 41 against the Warriors at halftime, and I'm like, what do I even ask after this game? Like
that was fun, huh?
What do you take? right. So, hey, good first half. What'd you think? Like, what am I supposed to ask about?
How did it feel when you were destroying the spirit of your opposition?
So, are you surprised when shots don't go in? Because I am. That's what it comes down to. But the lineup flexibility, I think, is a really big thing that we learned about last night. But we also learned too what certain groups are capable of. In that fourth quarter, Kenny Atkinson went to a lineup that had never played basketball together in an NBA game. I asked Karis LeVert after he got done with his scrum after the game, I asked him, I go, when was the last time you played power forward, just in basketball? He goes, I don't think I ever have. And did it in the last 6 minutes of a game that the Cavs won and outscored the opponent 20-9 in. Like it feels right now that every lever, even without all of the levers available to him, Kenny Atkinson's pulling the right one every single time.
Yeah, some of these things are supposed to not work, Kenny. You're supposed to take a swing and miss. Talk about being surprised when a shot doesn't go in. Metaphorically, Kenny hasn't missed too many shots yet this season. None of these lineups are really killing him. Even lineups that he's trotted out where I go, I don't like this. I don't like what we have versus what they have. Then I look up at the score at the end of the 4 or 5 minute shift, and it's either a break even or they're up like 6. And it's like, man, it's just crazy to see, and obviously it helps that all the players are playing so well, but like he has to get some credit for like the comfort level they're at. No one is playing timid. I feel like everyone, even some of the George Niang ISOs that last year I'm pulling out my hair because I'm like, this is not what we brought you here to do, brother. Like whether they win it or not, it just kind of felt off schedule. Like, dude, he's killing teams as a cutter right now. like
yes, they all are.
Yeah. It's a level of confidence up and down the board that just you have to tip your hat. And like, I think the number one example of that is Ty Jerome, right? I mean, my goodness. I mean, he only has 4 points yesterday. I couldn't believe he only had 4 points. because the 4 he scored were so big. But he comes off an 11, a 20, down to a 4. He's averaging 3 steals per 36. I think this guy is like, I mean, there's no shot he should leave our rotation this year if he keeps playing like this, correct?
No, he's been fantastic. And, he was somebody for me, and I don't know necessarily how you felt about him this summer, but he was the guy that was out of sight, out of mind because he played 15 minutes last year. I didn't know what he was going to look like coming off of that really gruesome ankle injury that kept him out for the entire season. And then to hear Kobe Altman say that he was the MVP of September when Kobe spoke at the pre-training camp availability that he and Kenny Atkinson had, that was an eyebrow raising comment for me, and it wasn't necessarily one that I knew how to take. Like I didn't know whether or not I should believe that type of thing. And then to see what he's been able to do, what Ty Jerome has been able to do for this team, there are a few games that they don't win without Ty Jerome's performance. Like even go back to Wednesday night in New Orleans, where they go on that 17-2 run in the second quarter. Ty Jerome's the guy that sparked it. And there have been a few runs like that throughout the season so far, where he's been such a key factor in those Cavs bench units having success. He's been awesome with that group. I don't know how you take him out of the rotation. I think that ultimately when this team is going to be fully healthy and gets Max Strus back and they have everybody available to play, this is a roster that has more than just 10 or 11 NBA caliber players, and it's really hard to play more than 10 or 11 guys.
Yeah, I mean, I'm at this point now where I'm pretty sure Kenny's going to play 11 until he can't, right? Because right now he's playing a pretty consistent 10, and he hasn't dropped below that much. There were a couple games when they were really beat up where he functionally played an 8-man rotation, like 2 guys got like 6-minute shifts, but like I feel like he hasn't wanted to play less than 10, and like I just don't know. I originally thought it was going to be Sam or George that might kind of fall out of the rotation, or Ty, but none of these guys deserve to lose minutes.
Right. And that's a really difficult place to be because I personally, I think playing 11 is a really, really challenging thing because if you're playing 11, I mean, it's not just that 11 guys are getting on the floor. It's that you have to find more than 10 minutes for 11 different guys. And that can be really challenging. What I do think Kenny has done really well that's made it possible and makes me believe he can figure it out is look how low the minutes for the starters have been. I think back to that New York game where Darius Garland just absolutely lit up the Knicks in the fourth quarter. He finished that game at like 34 minutes. That was the type of game that maybe earlier in his career, if he has it going like that, he's playing 41, 42 minutes. And that is a big difference. I think that is something that will allow, if Kenny does want to play 11, and I don't know of the 10 guys playing right now, I don't know who you would cut out. I'm glad that's not an issue I have to deal with. But it does give me thought that, okay, if Kenny has figured this out, where he's cut down starters minutes, where he's made this work, I think 11 is possible. I don't know how many minutes that 11th spot gets, but I do think it's possible.
Yeah, I think ultimately what is beneficial is Kenny has that degree of, he's very orthodox with how he does his rotations right now. Like you can count to the TV timeout who's coming in, when they're coming in.
Right.
And I think one way you can survive playing guys shorter shifts and just frankly less minutes writ large is they know exactly what their window of opportunity is to make an impact. Something I talked about with last year's team when the 5 minutes the team was healthy. There were a few games where JB tried to play 10 and it didn't feel comfortable. It felt like, okay, if I have 3 bad minutes, I'm not going to come back in because he's got to get this guy in. And you could tell that for the coach and for the players, and of course, we're doing some armchair psychologists. It's not like they went out and said this. Obviously it could be way wrong here, but it did feel like a little uncomfortable. It felt like, wearing someone else's clothes, whereas Kenny has not only the philosophy of playing a deep rotation, feels like he's got the plan. He's got the literal structures in place that accelerate his ability to do so.
Well, and I think he has the trust of the team, and I think he has the team playing. I think everyone on that roster right now that is in the rotation, I think they're all playing free. right? I don't think that you see guys looking over their shoulders. He's not had a quick hook with anybody. Now, there have been times where he's had to adjust the rotation, like for instance, last night with Jared Allen, only playing 21 minutes because he wasn't very good. That game against New York, Ty Jerome really didn't play in the second half.
Yeah, he had a horrible.
He wasn't very good.
He had a horrible first shift in that game.
Exactly. So there have been adjustments like that, but I think what matters there, and I'm very confident we'll see this on Monday night when they take on Chicago, just because you have a bad shift or maybe you are a bad matchup against a certain team, that hasn't rolled over. That hasn't been something that has affected the next game. Jared Allen had a bad game on Saturday night. You know what I expect him to do on Monday night? Look like Jared Allen again. And he's going to be treated like he's Jared Allen again. One bad game's not going to change things. One bad shift is not going to change things. I think that's a lot. And I think those guys understand that. And I think that matters a lot with how the way you can see Kenny manage the rotation and manage the roster.
Yeah, one bad shift will never tank anyone on the Cavs, but never has bad shifts is anyone who uses Zoom. Only you can do your best work. Zoom AI Companion can help you do the rest, like automatically taking notes, answering meeting questions, and helping you respond to your coworkers. Available at no additional cost with eligible paid plans. Work happy with Zoom AI Companion. One thing I wanted to ask you about, Danny, that I found interesting, one of the little windows we get into the kind of what Kenny values is Dean Wade starts the season at the small forward. Dean gets sick. Isaac steps in. Team does great. The lineup data with Isaac is excellent, and has been pretty much all year. And Dean comes back from his illness. They're playing the Warriors. We're like, kind of feels like a good Okoro matchup. And he sticks with Isaac in the starting lineup and has done so the last two games. What do you make of that decision? Because I honestly was pretty surprised because it felt like Dean was a Kenny Atkinson guy. Kind of just felt like that. Like just hearing Kenny talk about Dean, you're like, oh man, he loves this guy. He's going to stay in the starting lineup. He doesn't want to yank guys around. What did you make of that decision to go with Okoro? And it kind of seems like he's going to be the guy till Max comes back.
Right. I thought it was the right decision specifically against the Warriors. So when the starting lineup came out and Isaac Okoro was in, I'm like, okay, that makes sense. Isaac Okoro is going to follow around Steph Curry. That's not a fun job. It makes more sense for Isaac Okoro to do that than it does for Dean Wade. And then the game starts and Darius Garland is defending Steph Curry. I'm like, well, what do I know? Right. But I think they've been so good with Isaac in the lineup. It makes sense. I also think it makes sense that Dean might not be ready to, coming off this illness, play a full minutes allotment again. And maybe if he does get back to that point, and this could be something that it depends on matchups. Like if the Cavs go up against a team in the near future that has a big wing tandem, like I don't know, when they're in Boston in a couple of weeks, maybe it makes more sense to have Dean Wade in the starting lineup for those games. I think that position, that spot could be one that is matchup dependent. And with what Kenny has done, and I've talked a ton about earning the trust of the locker room and how this team genuinely does seem to believe in each other, I don't think anyone in the locker room would have an issue if that is the case, if that spot kind of changes a little bit. I think Isaac's been great. I don't see a reason in the near future to make that change, but if they decided to go in a different direction on certain games, I think that could make sense too.
Yeah, I mean, you really do have to have a lot of trust because guys don't like getting jerked around. They don't like not knowing if they're going to start or they're going to be on the bench. That, like, the one thing that you hear consistently about, like, coaches that really have the players' trust is I know what to expect when I go into work every day. And, like, so I don't think he makes those kind of changes lightly, but I do think, like, it's an interesting kind of look because as good as the Cavs started, a lot of the Dean with the starters lineup data wasn't bad, but it wasn't excellent. It was like, +1, +2 for 100 possessions, and Isaac was like +14. So, it's like Kenny the analytics guy versus Kenny the personality manager. And, it's interesting to kind of, learn what this guy values over the course of the season. And, I don't know if we still yet know, because maybe Dean does start against the Celtics and everything flips back. So it's going to be an interesting choice from there. One thing I did want to note about, I'm glad you brought up that Darius started on Steph. And This actually comes from my my absent co-host who has the gall to send in a topic for us to discuss.
Unbelievable.
On a game on a pod he's no showing, but
Wow.
I'm just going to read it direct. Warriors game was a great example of what we've talked about before, where in the past we'd break our defense overreacting to the Steph, Jalen Brunsons of the world. Trusting Darius on Steph and having Okoro blowing up pick and rolls by putting him on Draymond was so much better. What are your thoughts on that? Of just like the idea that Kenny's like, dude, Darius, we think you can handle it at least at a functional level. We're not going to completely change everything and have you go guard a power forward.
I think it's been great. And obviously the results from that game Friday speak for themselves, right? Like you don't have to do much more than look at the first half and what that box score looked like to say, hey, this worked out. I think it's been a really good thing to see Darius do too, because he's been so good, I think, on both ends of the floor. And
Absolutely.
No one's ever going to confuse him with Gary Payton as a defender. Like he's never going to be that guy, and that's fine. But what he's done defensively, I've been impressed with, because it's been good enough. He's been, I think, much better than he has been in the past on that end of the floor. And I think you can look at specific examples like the game where he defended Steph Curry, where he defended Jalen Brunson for a little bit, where he defended Damian Lillard at times against Milwaukee when I didn't think that would be something he would do. You look at all of that and it's like, okay, this guy he's up for the challenge in a way that I think is really good. It's a really good omen for this Cavs team, where with what he's talked about, the way he's played, the assignments he's taken defensively, everything that we've seen from Darius Garland so far has been a great sign, not only for him, but for where this team can go because of it.
Can I ask, I mean, this might be a stupid idea, and maybe I'm just, maybe there's just the glow of an 11 game win streak. I feel like he's playing the most impactful one-on-one defense of his career. Where I feel like he's always graded out. I feel like he's always graded out pretty well as a defender, at least the past few years. Where you go, hey, he's not going to tank your defense. He is a net helpful player because he's in the right spots at the right time, pretty active hands, whatever. I feel like he's like actively doing better work on ball this year. What do you think about that thought?
I would absolutely agree. I think he's been having the best defensive season of his career. And again, it's 11 games. It's a small sample size. The Cavs are winning. Like, it's very easy to say these things, but as you watch him, I don't remember him being able to defend Steph Curry the way that he did on Friday night. And especially a challenge that is as unique as Steph is. I don't know that he would have been able to do that in years past. I absolutely agree. I don't think that's a dumb thing to look at and say. And
I mean, even spiking Brunson's layup earlier in the season.
Right. Yes. It's something that has to keep up. Like it's been 11 games and he's been really good. I'm very curious to see if we're still saying this in 30 more games. I don't see why we couldn't be. But if we get to the All-Star break and we're still having this conversation about Darius Garland as a defender, as opposed to Darius Garland as an offensive player who's been phenomenal in his own right. But if we're having this conversation still, we're going to be talking about the Cavs as the team with the best record in basketball at that point, which obviously they have now, but again, small sample size.
Yeah, and there's a lot of season left. But yeah, I'm glad you agree, because I just feel like he is more balanced. He's less likely to get knocked off of his center of gravity. Maybe some of that weight gain, some of that just functional grown man strength from the summer that he's added. Same I think you can say with Evan, where I think both of them are playing the best defense of their careers. By the way, I noted this online. Dunked on Pod was doing kind of an analysis of who's real, who's not. And they were talking about the Cavs going into that Warriors game. And they'd mentioned that the Cavs were the 5th most unlucky team in the league in terms of opponent 3-point percentage,
Right.
And like, I totally feel that, because the Cavs do not have their best defensive rating of this era, and I was wondering about that going into the year, where I go, is the defense going to hold up with this much focus on the offense, with this much focus on pace? Like, not just points per game, but even the defensive rating. Are things going to slip? And I felt like they've played better defense than their numbers have showed. I feel like they've played some of the best defense at an individual level. I feel like Jarrett is playing some of the best defense of his career, both in the post and on, his normal elite help. I think Evan has been the most impactful defender he's ever been. I think Darius has been the most impactful defender he's ever been. It feels like if there's one thing of course, the offense probably is going to come to earth a little bit. They're not just going to keep shooting 46% from three or whatever they are shooting right now. But like the defense does feel like the one thing where I feel like they're slightly underperforming their actual performance.
I'm glad you brought up the unluckiness as far as opposing 3-pointers go, because I was thinking back to last weekend where they had that home and home with Milwaukee, and the Bucks entered that first game, which was last Saturday, as the, I believe, 28th ranked team in terms of 3-point shooting percentage. Like they had been bad. They were coming off a game in Memphis where they went like 9 of 47 from beyond the arc. And then what happens? Naturally, Damian Lillard hits 10 threes in that first game. AJ Green hits 7 threes in the second game. The Bucks shoot like 48% combined across the two games. It's like, well, of course, that is unlucky. And then you look at the game on Wednesday against New Orleans, where Jose Alvarado entered the game shooting like 30% from three. What does he do? Of course, he makes 7 threes, and like none of them are wide open threes, like they're contested shots. So I do think that this defense has probably been a little bit better than the numbers would indicate. I do think that they're not, I don't think they are the best defense in the league right now. I think Oklahoma City has been that. I don't think there's a question there.
But
But
we'll see how that plays
Cavs
out with if Chet misses
Right.
some time.
Right, and that will matter too. But to this point, I think the Cavs are 7th or 8th in defensive rating right now, before completion of the game Sunday night. I don't think they're the 8th best defense. Like I don't think
No.
there are 7 better defensive teams than the Cavs right now.
I couldn't agree more. I think this is a top 3, top 4 defense. I think they are
Yeah.
on a string. I think they are playing up and down the roster. You know, I don't know if anyone, I don't know who's playing poorly on defense right now. Obviously, it feels a lot. It's the inverse thing with the Knicks. I think about that Knicks series a lot and how it broke our brains, and how a lot of people were like, "Oh, we couldn't stop Brunson." I'm like, Brunson had a horrible series. We just couldn't score.
Right.
And the inverse, the other side of that coin is Cavs are scoring 130 every other night, so every stop feels devastating for the other team's chances of being competitive. So we might be artificially inflating just how good of defense they're playing because the Cavs have just been so darn good on the other end. But like in the end, I just think that they're playing above their weight there. A couple more things I want to knock out before we go is that Warriors win up 40 plus at halftime, an 83-point first half. Do you feel like this was the first game that really should make us change about what this team's ceiling is, and really change fundamentally where we think this team is with regards to the rest of the league?
I think it kind of depends on where you had them before. Now I have like my postseason expectation for them hasn't changed, but I talked prior to the season that I expected them to win 53 games and be the 3rd seed in the Eastern Conference. And now my thinking is, well, they should win 57 or 58 games and be the 1st or 2nd seed in the Eastern Conference. So I think that has changed. I don't know that I point to the Warriors game for that. I think I probably point to the first Milwaukee game for that, because that to me was one of the more impressive wins they've had. And I understand Milwaukee's record is not great. I think they're a better team than their record. But if you rewind back to that Saturday night, the Bucks were playing like an incredibly desperate team. The Cavs were on the second night of a back-to-back. Milwaukee got 75 points combined from Giannis and Dame, and the Cavs found a way to win. You don't do that unless you're a great team. Like good teams don't win that game. That's a game that great teams win, because you can't fake desperation. And the Cavs at that point, I believe, were 5-0. It's tough to play Friday night at home and then travel and play Saturday night on the road against a team that did not play on Friday night and win. And the Cavs still found a way. So like, I don't look at that Warriors game now. The first half they played against Golden State, I believe, is the best half of Cavaliers basketball I've ever seen in my life. I don't think that this franchise has ever played a more impressive singular half of basketball.
I was thinking maybe game 4 in 2017, down 3-0 against the Warriors. Maybe.
Yeah. but even then, because what stuck out to me about this half is if you score 80 plus points in the half, sometimes you can think, okay, Donovan had it going on. Like Donovan scored 25 in the first half, and that's why they got to it because he hit 4 threes. Their leading scorer at halftime had 13 points. Everyone that played, all 10 guys that played in the first half scored. Like it was a complete team effort on both ends, both offensively and defensively. And that to me is what made it so impressive. But I look back at that first Bucks win as the moment where I thought, okay, I might need to readjust my expectations for this team.
Yeah, and I think you're right, and I think that's actually a really good point. Because everyone can get got in the NBA. The degree to which the Warriors got was pretty special. But they were coming off a pretty emotional win themselves, and context. But like the reality is, like the fact that they've won in all these different kinds of ways. There's been a lot of comparisons to those 2015, 2016 Warriors with this team. The successful coach that got them there gets let go, and the new guy comes, and the team seems to take a leap. The other thing that I keep seeing is the sense of inevitability with that Warriors team, where it's like, even if they're not having a good game, they're going to string 6 possessions together, and you're only going to be able to string 4, and all of a sudden they're going to be tied, and now it's game on, and they can the Cavs can deliver a knockout punch better than almost anyone. So I think go ahead.
And there's one more thing to compare it to that Warriors team, and I'm sure you remember this, but think back to that finals run or that playoff run the Warriors had that year. What did the shirts that they were giving away to fans every game say? They said strength in numbers. The Cavs feel like a strength in numbers team right now. They've got the star power. I don't know that anyone on this roster is going to win MVP the way Steph Curry won MVP that year, but they've got the star power at the top, but they also have the strength in numbers stuff too. And I think that is the best comparison to that Warriors team, is just how deep this Cavs team is.
Yeah, absolutely, man. With regards to like where, our expectations are, I do think that's where the outcome based projections can kind of fool you. Cause like what I would say that the team's goal should be is to, be a 2 or, a 3-seeder up in the East and get to the Eastern Conference Finals. That would be my, the stated goal for the team. And that goal is probably not any different, but how I expect them to perform in the playoffs should be a little different now. If a limping Philly team, if they let's say they lock up the 1 seed and they play a limping Philly or a limping Milwaukee team, maybe before the year, I would say if they were in that kind of situation, I'm like, just get through it. Get through the series, survive in advance. Now I am starting to be like, hey, you need to decimate the teams that are a tier below you and if you get to the conference finals and you have a date with Boston, it's not just enough to show up and be pretty good. Make them sweat. I feel like going into the year, I'm okay for them to be like, make a good showing and don't embarrass yourself. Now I'm like, make them sweat and almost win. And that would be my new kind of expectation for the team. And that is, so even though the outcome is actually not that different, get to the Eastern Conference Finals, I feel like the how and the vibe around it has changed for me.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, because I went into this season and I think I don't love putting teams like in order 1 through 15 in a conference. Like I think putting them in tiers is a more helpful exercise, just because, you can be separated by a game. Like look at the end of the year last year. The Cavs were a game behind the 2 seed at the end of the year. So I had the Cavs in the 2nd tier in the East. Boston was the only team in the 1st tier, and then it was the Cavs and New York, Philly, Milwaukee. Right now, I don't know if the Cavs are in the 1st tier with Boston. I think there's an argument only because Boston has won a title and still looks really, really good. So I think that there might be an argument there that they're alone in tier 1. But if they are alone in tier 1, the Cavs are alone in tier 2. Like the Cavs are either in Boston's tier or they're alone. But the rest of those teams that I talked about, I think are a step below. And with that, like I went into this year thinking if they face any of the teams in their tier, it's sort of a coin flip if they're going to win that series in the playoffs. Now, I think it's the expectation that unless it is Boston, The Cavs should win that series, and it should not be a coming down to the final possessions of Game 7 type of series too.
I really kind of thought we were at a point where the Cavs weren't going to be able to outpace their expectations like this anymore and force us to change. Because, Justin and I have joked a lot about how the last couple of years, the Cavs, we and the fan base have kind of decided what the Cavs need to do going into a year. Then they're so good that we change. And then when they don't get to our changed expectation, we're mad at them, even though they've accomplished our preseason goals pretty comfortably. It's like,
Right.
The first year was like, just get into the play-in. And then they're so clearly ahead of the play-in that when they fall into the play-in and lose, we're disappointed. And then it's just get to the playoffs. And then it's like, then they get run off by, then they're so good. We're like, how are we losing to the Knicks in 5 games? And then this, and just, they kind of keep getting our, making us raise the stakes for them. And I thought those days were done, and I guess I was wrong. What a cool team. Last question I'll ask you before we go is, who do you think the Cavs' best player has been so far? And I think there is an objectively correct way to respond to this.
I think that their best player has been the strength in numbers. Like I can't say, and listen,
you answered exactly how I wanted you to answer, which is who cares?
Right?
Doesn't matter.
Right. Like Donovan Mitchell is still the best player on this team. And I think Donovan has been good. I think Donovan has another level that he can and will get to this year that he has not yet reached. And I think the Cavs will need that at a certain point, but they haven't needed it yet. But look up and down the box score. Look how many times Donovan Mitchell has led the team in scoring. Look how many times Darius Garland has led the team in scoring. Look how many times Evan Mobley has led the team in scoring. Like they've played 11 games and it's pretty even. I think it's 4-4-3. That I think speaks to just how many different guys can attack with this team offensively. And you can't look at it and say, oh, they're 11-0 because Evan Mobley has carried them, or Donovan Mitchell has carried them, or Darius Garland has carried them, or Jarrett Allen. You can't say that because it's been a different guy every night. And when you're an opposing team trying to put together a scouting report, and that's the case, good luck. Like, and that's where things are right now with the Cavs.
Yeah, I think it's the objectively correct answer, is it just doesn't matter. And I think I actually would argue it's the road for this team to hit its goals. I think about how this team, at least in my current estimation, who the heck am I? But in my current estimation, I don't think this team has a top 10 player on it. I think Donovan is the closest thing to that. He's like 8 or 9 or 10, but he's not like in the Jokic tier in the league, right? He's
no, but I do think that since he's been on the Cavs, he's been a top 10 player in basketball when he's been healthy. That would be my pushback there.
Yeah.
Like
if he's 9, 10 or
MVP.
Yeah, he's amazing. I'm not. This is not a dig at Donovan. I think he is. I think he's right up there with the best players in the league. But I do think there is a uber top tier that even like a guy like Jason Tatum, I don't think is in, and he just won a title.
Sure. Yeah.
And I feel like in the history of the league, if you don't, in the history of the league, the history says you need to have one of those top 3, top 4 guys if you want to win a title.
Right.
And the only folks who have bucked that trend, including, in my opinion, last year's Celtics, are the teams that have so much top-end talent in their top 4 or 5 guys that they can rebuild it in the aggregate. Not to go full Moneyball on you. I feel like, Jason Tatum could have 2 or 3 bad finals games as a scorer, and they could still easily run away with a finals win against Dallas. And I feel like the same thing about this Cavs team, where, if this team wants to get to that ultimate goal of winning a championship, if they don't have that omega, top 1, top 2, top 3 super duper star, they need to be able to accommodate if Donovan's going to have a bad game, or Darius is going to have a bad game, or Evan's going to have a bad game. And I feel like this version of the team is the best proof of that. I think of the 04 Pistons, a team that,
right.
Won in the aggregate. They had 4 guys that could be superstars on any given night, depending on what the team needed. And that's what I think this team has at their best. And to me, this is kind of just the entire idea of the construction of the team.
Yeah, and it's a pick your poison type of thing. That's how it was with Boston last year. And I know they had two guys that were at the top, but they also had phenomenal role players. I mean, if Drew Holiday is your fourth best player, the way he was for the Celtics, or third best player, you're in a really good spot. Right now, either Darius Garland or Evan Mobley or Jared Allen, one of those guys is your third or fourth best player. There are not very many teams in the NBA that their third or fourth best player is as good as the Cavs. And I think throughout a long regular season, that makes a big difference. And if this team is gelling the way that they're gelling now, and I think that they can get to in the future, like this is not, I don't think we've seen the Cavs top gear in November. I think that'd be silly to think. But if they get to the level of play that I believe they can get to, then they're going to be really, really difficult to stop in the playoffs. They will be.
Yeah, they're an awesome team, man. I'm really, really grateful for the start that we've gotten to see, and I'm really grateful to you for coming on and being my sub co-host. Danny, one more time, tell us where we can find your work.
Yeah, so you can check out my podcast, Locked On Cavs, every day, wherever you get your podcast, Apple, Spotify, everywhere else, on YouTube as well. Also, you can check out everything I write over at The Inside Shot. It's my Substack. Just Google The Inside Shot, or find me on Twitter at RealDCunningham, or on Blue Sky. Just Danny Cunningham on Blue Sky, which has really seemed to have taken off over the last week or so. But everything I write about the Cavs goes up there.
I'm dabbling in Blue Sky, Danny. We'll see.
I like it, man.
Justin's hard selling me. So anyway, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you so much. If you are hanging out in the YouTube, make sure you hit a like and subscribe to the Cavs channel. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, go ahead and subscribe, unsubscribe, resubscribe, help cook those books. The Cavs have 3 big games next week. Let's see if we can head to Boston 15-0. I gotta say, guys, I think we're gonna do it. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. And as always, go Cavs.